everybody for coming tonight to Watershed Education Network's 2023 Winter Speaker Series featuring Seamus Land, who is a EVST alumni and co-facilitator of Grand Creek Working Group from Clarkport Coalition. He's going to be talking about his thesis work today and where he explored the biophysical and social dynamics of the creek and kind of his continued research and work on collaborative landscape stewardship. So I'm Brooke Bauer, one citizen science coordinator. Steffi Novak is right here. She's our stream team coordinator. Again, she's going to be managing everything tech. And then Kat Lester is our communications coordinator. And then we have some awesome volunteers here as well, Kyle Wonders and Joe Toth. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. Cool. So before we go into Seamus's presentation, I just want to give a quick overview of who WEN is. I know some of you are familiar, but just in case, I'm going to give you a little intro to who we are. So WEN is a 501c3 nonprofit located here in Missoula, Montana. We've been working since 1996 and getting our community members into the creek, collecting data, and participating in our various citizen science programs. And we do this all through our mission, which is to foster a knowledge, awareness, appreciation of watershed health through citizen science, youth and school engagement, and outreach to our community in order to grow these future stewards. A few programs have materialized over the years that carry this mission into our community. And first off, our citizen science stream team, which is a volunteer team of community members who participate in monitoring in late summer and fall, and they help us collect data on different properties of the creek. So physical, chemical, biological, to all really help us get a cool, awesome picture of stream health. This program, our stream team, has really evolved over the years and strengthened in relation to the 2020 dam removal on the Rattlesnake Creek, and has really started producing super high quality data that is usable for our community, which is really exciting and is really cool to see with citizen scientists. We also have our youth and school programs where we provide immersive river monitoring opportunities for youth in our community. And our Backcountry Stream Corps is a program offered for high school aged individuals to get out into the creek and collect data on aquatic habitat. And we'll be wading up the creek, surveying large woody debris. So looking at jams, root wads, beaver dams, you name it, all of these things that bioindicators like macroinvertebrates and beavers and fish really love. So it's a really cool way for youth to get involved with local monitoring. And it's really fun. And we're going to start recruiting for crew members for this upcoming season. So if you know of any high school aged folks, we'd love to talk to them. We also have our pilot program, Backyard Citizen Science, which we provide kits and resources for community members, groups to go out and independently explore and collect data on their local stream, creek, river, pond, whatever you name it. They can go out independently and we provide the resources for them to collect data on that stuff. So that's pretty exciting. We also have our speaker series, which all of y'all are at. This is our second year. We really like the speaker series because it keeps the conversations about our watersheds flowing into the winter and into the spring now. And we invite local experts in to talk about everything water in our community. And it's really been so fun to share this platform with our partners. We also have groundwater monitoring, which is a program based out of Greeno Park. And it's based off a program that was founded by Dr. Beth Covet and Bill Wisner, both people who used to teach here. And it was originally in groundwater curriculum for high school students to go out and collect groundwater elevation data in Greeno Park and kind of understand this idea of how surface water and groundwater is interacting. We've adapted this program to fit to our citizen science stream team, our adult monitoring. So we go out to 15 wells around Greeno Park and collect that same groundwater elevation data to compare over time and look at that surface water and groundwater interaction. Lastly, we have our Rise Challenge Big Sky, which is about to wrap up here. And it's a program for schools around Montana in partnership with Brightways Learning. And it allows for students to have the opportunity to develop ideas and solutions to make their communities more resilient to natural disasters, which is pretty cool. And they're about to have the Rise Summit coming up here pretty soon, where the students will present their proposals and they will be reviewed and be rewarded with implementation funding. So it's a really cool way for students to get involved with resiliency planning in their community. And you can stay, Wen's pretty involved and we're judging this year, I believe. And you can see what those projects look like on our website. Cool. So these are some of our upcoming dates. We're kind of rolling into our field season, which is so exciting. Getting out of the cold of the winter, starting off with groundwater monitoring. We have one more speaker series, Lad No Tech, which I'll talk about more. And then, like I said, the Rise Challenge, Missoula Gives is coming up, which is a great way to support your favorite nonprofits here in Missoula. And then our stream team will be rolling into June. And then we have our Windermere Sup Cup in July, which is a stand-up paddleboard race. Okay. So our next presentation, our final presentation as part of our series is Lad No Tech, Fish, Wildlife and Parks fisheries biologist. He's going to be giving a presentation on monitoring and updates on Rattlesnake Creek aquatic resources in relation to the Rattlesnake Dam Removal. He's a really valuable resource and is super involved in a ton of monitoring around town. He's kind of like the fish guru of Missoula, and we're really excited to have him share his knowledge, I guess. It's awesome. And that's on Tuesday, April 25th in the same room, not 3:30, 3:32. I'll change that on our website so nobody's confused. Cool. So all of these programs that I've outlined, some may be new to you, some might strike interest for you. If you are interested, feel free to go to our website at montanawatershed.org. There you can get Steffi and I's email or sign up directly on the sign up forms on the website, where you can get a little bit more information pertaining to the different monitoring opportunities that I outlined. Cool. So Seamus grew up in central coast of California, where he gained a love for the landscape while running, surfing, and tromping around the coastal mountains. He went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, where he studied earth science and English and ran on the cross-country and track teams before returning home to work several years as a dune restorationist and an orange orchard manager. He recently completed his master's in environmental studies at the University of Montana with a thesis on the biophysical and social dynamics of Grant Creek and their implications for collaborative ecological restoration. He is currently supporting Grant Creek Working Group and nurturing collaborative landscape stewardship. And we're really excited to have Seamus here today. He's a new partner to Wend, and we're really excited to be working with him. Let's give a warm welcome to Seamus.
Thanks, Brooke and Steffi and Kat and everybody for being here on a beautiful spring day. This is a lot of this is based out of my thesis, but I really wanted to take the opportunity today to make it a little bit more accessible, and just try to build that bridge between the university. We are in the university, but I'll try to make this interesting, and we have a couple activities that hopefully the people on Zoom can take part in as well. So the title is ReSTORYing Grant Creek, which was the title of my thesis. case study of relational dynamics on a degraded Montana stream, Grant Creek. Relational dynamics I'm going to talk a little bit about today because that's sort of the methodology of the academic approach. But the restoring is going to be the central piece today too, because I think it's when I was thinking about this opportunity to speak, it was kind of an open invitation to talk about this work. And there's so many different threads, but I kind of wanted to see if I could communicate or articulate this idea of restorying. It's kind of a play on words, but it's also a really interesting concept that I think could be a part of this process that's underway in Grant Creek. So I'm going to give a little background just to set the stage for today. Talk about the site, talk about my methods, try not to get too dry there, but it'll be important for understanding that concept of restorying. And then I'll share some findings. So, just some bits and pieces of Grant Creek so you all have a feel for that place. And then talk about community restoration, kind of what's going on right now. So I have this positionality statement, which is largely from my thesis, but I think it was really important for the academic approach, and it's been really important to bear in mind as I just navigate different rooms, different roles throughout this process. So I'm a white male, I'm a newcomer to the Missoula Valley, and all the time in every situation, it's been really important for me to recognize, the privilege of perceived real class, race, and gender to interpret and just kind of understand my role and build trust in the community. And then I also have this bit that kind of, articulates that, as a newcomer, I've been able to sort of see these openings and possibilities that also, I think, that's kind of the learning experience of kind of uncertainty and certainty and navigating in between. So, but I think this is also important because this type of positionality statement is really important to grounding any sort of academic research and, community advocacy, recognizing that reflexivity that's part of relating to people. And I guess I'll also say that the relational dynamics, I don't want to scare you off with just kind of an academic term, but really the relational dynamic is just the same old relating to people and place and, non-human species. That's something that we all do. It's very intuitive. So it shouldn't seem like it's a dry category and term. So as Brooke mentioned, I got into ecological restoration and really natural resources work at the Oceano Dunes. This is a picture of one of our big revegetation sites where we're staging these hay bales that will later become a mulch for the outplantings. And over the 3 years I was there, we did revegetation on about 220 acres. There's a lot of work, a lot of money, a lot of voices in the conversation. There's an off-highway vehicle park. There was an air quality issue downwind. So it was this kind of multifunctional, multi-purpose restoration project. And I just love the work. I love just being in the dunes. And but also as we kind of saw these projects develop, and this is that same site, I think a year or two later. Those are mostly like lupin that you can see. What I see here is a site that's a product of many voices and many values, and the shape of it is a negotiation with the rangers and the riders who wanted that little slip face over there so they could ride, and so they asked for that part, and then the ecologist was chiming in saying we need this kind of connectivity for this to work. It's really a conglomerate of a lot of different voices. And so as I was doing this work, it was so evident that restoration is just so complex and fraught, but also really hopeful as a way to bring people together and do this kind of meaningful work on the ground. So I felt the desire to study it at kind of a more academic level, answer some of these bigger questions, and came up here and jumped into the deep end of kind of that big question: what even is ecological restoration? So just to start and to turn it all to you for a moment, I'm just curious to hear if you all would be able to shout out a couple things that you think goes into ecological restoration. Not looking for the overall definition, but I just thought it'd be valuable to hear what you all know about ecological restoration.
Already guys that connectivity.
Connectivity, great. It's a terrible.
time element, thing. Considering how place was or will be.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, sweet. Thank you. Cool to see that this kind of, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of different disciplines and different like notions involved here. And that's really kind of one of the main takeaways that I have here is that people bring so many different things to what ecological restoration is, and so it's an opening, but also a complicated conversation between all these things. And even, the idea of time is like, that's a philosophical concept that, I think has yet to be settled, or, there's so many ways to go within all this too. Urbans. It's kind of a didactic definition, very kind of specific and structured, but that's what they went with at the time. And it was a really debated topic at the time too. There was a lot of different ethical debates going on. And since 1990, they've kind of recognized that and kind of tried to reckon with those those more complicated issues. So in the current definition that they hold right now, among other things, they call it the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So it's sort of a different orientation to the original point. I'm not going to go too into like the exact changes that are in here, but you can see that they're trying to bring in these new concepts. And the other thing they're trying to do is really take seriously the human values that are important for establishing a connection to place. And so they're much more welcoming into the picture that it's reestablishing a relationship to place as much as it is doing something and calling it an ecosystem that's bounded and can be measured and all that stuff. So I won't go too into depth here, but this is what I came here to study, the lineage of ethical thinking. This is a book that kind of put the ethical debate on the map. This guy, Robert Elliott, wrote this book and he basically said restoration is faking nature. It's humans intervening and making of what was natural a fakery, a forgery. He's saying, maybe it's good to do it. Maybe you'll get more species there, but you can't call it real nature. That's fake. He also said, other people said that there would be potential of people using restoration as a way to apologize for industry, or say, we can just go mine here as long as we can restore on the back end, right? So he was saying it'll always be of lesser value, and it'll always represent human intervention, human arrogance and hubris, and it's the same domination model that got us here in the first place. Other people have brought into the frame that you can have malicious restoration like that, but there's also benevolent restoration, and it depends on your intent. And then more and more, these deeper challenges to the paradigm, which I have here too, that people are saying it's not only about the ecosystem metrics, it's about recognizing the history, the original inhabitants, perhaps. And that Robin Wall Kimmerer has kind of put on the map this indigenous approaches to ecological restoration that are kind of remarkably different, even though they're recognizable. They come from a very different worldview, and she articulates ways to bridge those different worldviews. And there's so much to this history of restoration, but you can see that you go into this question of restoration, what is it? And you get access to all of these other social and ecological conversations, which I find so compelling. The other thing that's so interesting is that we're in the second year of the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. So whereas in 1990, it was maybe something that people thought about doing, maybe they'd do a project, but they wouldn't necessarily call it restoration. Now it's something of global significance. People are trying to articulate a vision for a global practice. And whether or not you think it's good, bad, whatever, it's out there. It's a huge part of natural resources management programs worldwide. So it's really amazing where we are with this story. When I came up here, I got to see all kinds of really cool projects. This is a beaver dam analog in the Anaconda Uplands. One of the intents is to mitigate the erosion, the incision of a lot of those really degraded landscapes up there from the smelter dust and a lot of other extractive industries. And here did some of this beaver dam analog work, got to see some biochar work. All kinds of stuff is happening all up and down this area. So it's a really cool place to be for thinking about restoration. Oh, and this is how the vision, and actually this week I think is the Beaver Conference. Is it this week? There's a big Beaver Conference in Bozeman, which is also another amazing, it's a measure of how far this conversation has come. That these conversations, from a place that was one of the most like the profoundly devastated by the trapping to having a conference on restoring rewilding beavers. Well, let's go back to Grant Creek here. That's what we're here to talk about today. So this is a picture from in the up the headwaters, near the headwaters. This is on the ridge between Butler and Grant Creek, just above Snowbowl there. And it's just beautiful up there. Not a lot of people know about this area, partly because there's no trails. There's no current trails right there. And there's no roads that go into the upper areas of Grant Creek. So it's kind of underknown, underappreciated. And in some ways that's been a good thing for the ecological condition. It's not very trammeled, you might say, but it's it flows all the way down and goes through town. We'll talk about that part. It flows into the Clark Fork down by Kelly Island. People have called it the forgotten wilderness stream because unlike Rattlesnake Creek, it doesn't have the same cachet in town. That people don't know it in as many ways. And even if you live on it, you might not know where it flows below your house. Of course, this is the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispay people, because that's, what we're talking about. And I'm hoping we have some time to talk about that, dive a little deeper on that today. The name for Grant Creek, the Salish, is, I'm going to pronounce it terribly, Nifkesum, which means little wide creek you can cross. And we can talk a little bit about what that name refers to and what it means. So just back to how I got involved too. I came here for the program, started hearing about this conversation about the Mullen Area Master Plan, now the Swatipkane Master Plan. And it was people who started in that process of planning this new area set to accommodate the next growth of Missoula. People brought into the picture restoring Grant Creek. And so I heard that and said, I've never heard about Grant Creek. I guess it needs to be restored. There must be some degradation. And then kind of track that story as it unfolded. And I know, Vicky in the room here has long been talking about restoring Grant Creek. So I sort of just began to learn about this process and just came to a sense that there's a need for a refreshed framing, more awareness in the community, and potentially a deeper analysis, which I wanted to provide as in my role as a master's student and be of use to this process. So just an overview of the creek, and I'm not, don't worry about this segment stuff. This is sort of more particular, but it comes down from, you cross it when you go up to Snowbowl. There's a bridge over on Snowbowl Road. This is a photo by the interstate. So it flows down next to Grant Creek Road, mostly the whole way there. And sorry, Bert, I'm ignoring the upper areas for now, but this is where it gets, hey, it's in great shape. So, this is where it gets interesting. I'd say not interesting, somewhat sad in a lot of ways. Down below the interstate, you can see it flowing. I hope you can all see that sort of line of trees, pretty narrow right there, but it flows down past behind those hotels. You might see it sometimes. Highlander Beer, they have their backyard that opens up to it. And then it goes further west along the railroad tracks. There's thoughts that it likely flowed straight at this point and was diverted. Flows down below Broadway. This is an area that you can see if you're driven towards the airport. That's one of the airport runways there. This is an area that's been ranched heavily for a long time, and that big bend that people call Horseshoe Bend has been diverted and ditched largely. This is further down. This is Mullen Trail subdivision, which some of you may be familiar with because of the flooding that occurred on Grant Creek in 1997. But this is an area that's really interesting as well, really complex, really diverted, and a lot of different work has been done on it over the last 100+ years. But also there's a lot of subdivisions that go right up to it. And then it goes under Mullen Road. And this last bit here, and I'm just zipping through this so that we have a general sense of where the creek goes comes out of Mullen Road, goes down a bigger hill, and then it flows out into this bigger kind of wetland ranchland area. And it comes down at the Kelly Island access on the north side of the river. So I don't know if many people have gone to the southern access to Kelly Island and not so much on the north side, but there's also Fish, Wildlife, and Parks property there. And so, you know, that's public access, and you can see the confluence of Grant Creek down there if you're interested. So those are some segments, and I know, you know, hopefully that gives you a decent sense of where it flows, at least through town. But I'm going to back up to the methodology and talk about what the relational dynamics really are all about. This is kind of the roots of what I was trying to look at in the study. You know, there's the ethical piece, which I mentioned. There's the politics of how those values get negotiated and worked out. There's the history, the deep sense of time. And then there's this ways of knowing piece of trying to incorporate different ways of seeing things. There's so many different disciplines you could talk about, as we saw here. There's the ecology, of course, and there's the, you know, sociology and all these other disciplines that people speak from. And then, of course, yeah, the ecology as well. I came across the relational term as the relational turn that people describe in a paper that articulated how social ecological systems, which is commonly how people talk about these situations now, can potentially still keep social and ecological apart from each other. They can treat them as separate. So the relational turn was an attempt to really find the ways that humans and the natural world are connected, right? And so it's easy to talk about interconnectivity, but it's not so hard to describe it in academic settings. The relational turn was an attempt to focus on the in-between, not so much here's the social dynamics, here's the ecological dynamics, and here's how they maybe bounce off each other. But what are the ways that the two are feeding back on each other, creating each other, and you know, what are the dynamics at play there? That's kind of subtle, but I think you all have that intuition on how, you know, the way somebody cares for a creek or you know, a landscape has a bearing on how they, you know, they see their place in the world, and then it changes the way they act with the creek or the site, and then that has a feedback with them. And so it's kind of that really complicated interplay between humans and the natural world. You know, and here I am just making this very dry, but this is a project that's offered from the relational approach to be able to describe more holistic dynamic analyses of human nature connectedness, more empirical accounts of knowledge production that are more inclusive, essentially, in decision making, and then potentially open up space for new sustainability interventions. And, you know, that's happening with beaver restoration. That's an example of people opening up space in a conversation and imagining new old ways of nurturing relationships in place and practice. So that's kind of like, you know, I'm hoping this feels a little bit somewhat intuitive, but this is what I wanted to offer to the Grant Creek conversation. So it came to these two research questions, which I thought could encompass those. What are the relational nature human dynamics in the Grant Creek watershed right now? What can I discover about those dynamics? And then what approaches to ecological restoration do those dynamics restrict or enable? What bearing do they have on the conversation about restoration? So how do we get at those questions? I was lucky enough to participate in a survey that the Clark Fork Coalition launched in summer of 2021. I offered my help, and with Will McDowell, and a lot of volunteers, some of whom are here, walked down 10 miles of Grant Creek from Snowball Road down to the confluence, with a few exceptions with some access issues. But we surveyed a variety of ecological indicators, quantitative, qualitative approach, but this is a pretty widely accepted method for rapidly assessing the health of a stream. So we looked at bank stability, vegetative condition, you know, different land use types, a couple of those indicators that can just give you a sense of good, medium, bad, the condition of the stream. And so you can see the green, yellow, and red. The green is sustainable, yellow's at risk, and red is just not sustainable. And you can really see that below the interstate, which is again right here, it gets pretty bad. There's no more sustainable reaches down below the interstate as far as we surveyed. And so we offered these indicators of where is the creek in bad shape, and then tried to articulate some early restoration recommendations, which were just based on only viewing the stream. So when we were doing that, it was so great to get this information in one place. And a map like this just speaks so much. But you also, when you're writing those recommendations, you start to realize, like, okay, the bank's unstable here. Why is it unstable? Well, I don't know. In the scope of the survey, I don't know. But I saw a cow up there, and I saw, I walked through the rancher's property on the way down there. Maybe the land use, has something to do with it. So you just start to, ripple out into those bigger questions. And it was clear that this is a starting point, but it shouldn't be the whole story. So again, in that relational approach, to try to understand the condition and perhaps the perceptions and the land use approaches, I did 20 in-depth interviews with landowners and land managers on the same sections of stream. And so those are people I got to know through the process of surveying and then cold calling and all that stuff, and got to interview 5 people in each of those segments, which you don't need to worry about. But I focused on the land use and their location on the stream, and asked them questions about the place, their sense of place, the community, their perceptions of the community, and what restoration meant to them, essentially. So similar to this, I came up with so many amazing answers, and all of this data was just such an amazing addition to that riparian assessment. So that was a lot of stuff that was just kind of describing what happened, really the approach and the way I'm thinking about this. But I want to pause here to dive into that idea, that question of restorying. And it's like I mentioned, it's partly just a fun term, but there's some people who have tried to describe it as a way to think about ecological restoration, and a way to highlight the idea of story and the connectivity of the story through the project. Gary Navhan, I think, kind of coined the term. He's a writer, thinker, who's done a lot of amazing things. Native Seed Search is one of his projects. But he really just wants to articulate that it has to do with a thread that's continuous through the project. But before I describe that more, I want to just ask you all what Missoula's story is. And we'll do a quick activity here, and I hope it's doable on Zoom as well. You can throw these answers in the chat, but I'm going to ask you to find 1 or 2 people that maybe hopefully you don't know. Share your familiarity with Grant Creek prior to today. Introduce yourself, and then discuss what stories or threads are a part of Missoula's story. And then we can bring a couple things to share out on the whiteboard here. So I'll give you guys a couple, maybe 5 to 10 minutes on that. So much in between, in addition to all of what you shared, but I really appreciate you all doing that activity. But what you see here, it really becomes clear that there's, one story is almost untenable in certain ways. And so I just threw some images on here. This is the Milltown Dam, some industry, and then this is, there's just a lot of dogs here. I don't know. That's some part of the story somehow. Like the idea is that there's so many stories, but there is, in a lot of ways, there is one story, but they're all multiple threads run through it. So, it feels overwhelming to think about how do you tell the story that accounts for all of this all at once. And similarly, even if you were to think about focusing on Grant Creek alone, how could you possibly know about the Buddha house when you're talking about the restoration? What bearing does it have? I don't know, but it happened. It's part of the story. So I think it's the ReSTORYing concept is an invitation to think about narrative, to think about experience, and to bring that in a certain way. And I'll talk a little bit more about the ReSTORYing as an academic approach too. But I do want to share just some findings so you feel like, you know, it's clear enough what I got out of all this. This is a spot on Grant Creek by the airport, very in size, dewatered, clearly used heavily. This is an old tractor crossing, 2 giant cement culverts. This area is really heavily degraded. There's not fish habitat right now in this area. The other amazing, and this is another spot just further down. You can see those exposed roots, a dry section of the stream. This is taken in July. I have a couple of things here. One of the most amazing things that I still kind of can't believe that this dam that I'm standing on there was a dam set up to hold water in the ditch. And all that water right in front of there, that's not Grant Creek water, that's Clark Fork water that's been taken out of the Clark Fork over by Imagination Brewery and then sent over along Mullen Road, and it fans out across the agricultural area. It's called the Flin Lowney Ditch. And for about 100 years, it backwatered up Grant Creek's channel. So it's like you couldn't more creatively come up with a way to destroy Grant Creek in a way. Like Clark Fork water flowing backwards up Grant Creek's dry channel with a dam. So that was kind of a remarkable finding. Another interesting thing about Grant Creek, it's intermittent, which means it doesn't continuously flow and connect to the Clark Fork, but actually above, it's perennial where Bert lives, up at Prospect, it flows year round. It dries up near Highlander Brewery, International Drive area into July. And then it's dry until you get down below Mullen Road, and it's perennial again. So it flows, it's spring fed down to the river at the bottom. So it's a really interesting hydrologic phenomenon. There's all kinds of land uses that kind of get at this different versions of histories. There's the I just wrote histories instead of gravel pit. The growth, there's all kinds of development. There's commercial, industrial, suburban development. There's the agriculture, there's the gravel mining. So there's kind of many threads of Missoula's story present in Grant Creek. There's also a really varied kind of constituency on the creek. There's a ranch owned by Dennis Washington, Montana's own billionaire, and there's rentals and what do you call them? Mobile home parks down near Grant Creek as well. So there's kind of a whole gamut of Missoula's population and demographics. It's very significantly degraded. There's certain areas where there's been significant floods that have caused damage to homes, and potentially, there's continuously the risk of erosion and more flooding in the future. And there's a huge lack of fish habitat and connectivity. This check dam is really, a significant barrier to any connectivity. But at the same time, as we learned from Lad Notek, who's going to speak next month, that there's really amazing bull trout populations in the upper reaches, almost all the way down through Prospect Homeowners Association. So there's really significant, very genetically pure strains of bull trout that exist in the upper reaches with no connectivity to the river. So it's kind of this all over the place story of really amazing, beautiful spots and just really significantly degraded spots and all that in between. Another interesting thing, this little, you can barely see it, but that little log cabin was a home for the Mullen Trail road builders. So that they built that house when they were moving through town to build the Mullen Trail, which parts of it became the interstate. Meriwether Lewis camped at the confluence of Grant Creek in 1806. There's a house down below on Grant Creek where 3 siblings were born in the same house in the same place in 3 different states: Washington Territory, Idaho Territory, and Montana Territory. So over the span that those states and territories were changing, these 3 siblings were born different states. Just kind of a silly trivia bit. And then, I'll go into this a little bit more too. the whole network of Salish trails in this area were very kind of involved in Grant Creek in different ways. There's encampments that were all up and down the watershed. There's trails that lead from the bottom of Grant Creek back down to the Bitterroot, and then the upper headwaters about the tribal wilderness area, and there was a lot of travel that would happen on the ridges. And then the road to the Buffalo, which is also was one of the foundations of the Mullen Trail, and then the interstate. There were camps near Grant Creek along there, and there was likely use of fire in clearing those areas for bitterroot harvesting as well. And then I just put here, there's long-standing relationships with Grant Creek, people who have lived there for a long time, and there's people who are just moving there today, this year or in the last couple of years. So there's all kinds of things going on here. And I just have this little map on with some anthropological research that was done through the university showing some trails that were significant to the Salish, and then some of the bitterroot harvesting sites which coincide with some of Grant Creek. Yeah, it's a small map, but it is public information. It's really fascinating to see the networks of trails in the valley. These are some excerpts from the interviews that I think get to some of the relational dynamics. I'm not going to over explain these, but you see how people are talking about some work that you might do for restoration, and then some that you take your hands off and accept that the agency of the stream is at play as well. That's kind of a different thing than the engineering model that you might plop down and say, here's what we need to do. It's sort of a different orientation. The recognition that beavers have different plans than us. Irrigation and the way flooding and the flows of water had to do with the agricultural history. And I think what's interesting too is once you start retelling the story like this, you don't set the landscape as a backdrop to human activity. You really see it as an interactive co-evolutionary process of humans living on this landscape. People talked about this ethic of reciprocity, which Vicky mentioned. You take care of the land, it will take care of you. We should give back instead of just taking, referring to the water and water rights. And then this person setting it in the context of a interpersonal relationship. But I like that they were at least extending that invitation. A smile begets a smile. It's a simple way of understanding that reciprocity. And that was in particular talking about like doing work for the creek, for the good of the creek. I don't think I'll go into too much depth on the legal dynamics. It's widely considered to be a ditch. It's people know it as a ditch in a lot of the areas. It's a really complex story when it comes to the jurisdiction and who takes jurisdiction over a ditch versus a stream. The Missoula Conservation District administers the 310 law, the Natural Stream Bed Preservation Act, that has this language here. These rules apply to projects on natural, perennial, flowing streams or portions thereof. Right now, the Missoula Conservation District takes jurisdiction on the 2 perennial segments of Grant Creek, not on the ditch section, but the water still flows through that section. It's really complex to understand why they don't take jurisdiction, what it would mean if they did. This person is referring to the way that the verbiage has changed and the way people's understanding has changed, which is, clearly they understand it currently as a ditch, but it leaves it open to new ways of recognizing Grant Creek in the area. And then I just have this kind of crazy sign that we saw while doing work on Grant Creek of Northwestern Energy, restoring our waters and habitats to works of art. So in case you ever needed a reason to think about what ecological restoration means, is like, you gotta check your pocketbook when someone says this to you. Okay. I'm gonna try to bring this plane in for a landing here with some restoring on Grant Creek. Restoring, the concept is really all about that narrative continuity, past, present, and future, trying to reckon with the past, act in the present, and then think about the future and where we're headed and trying to keep that continuity. It's about embodied storytelling, trying to take accountability for the stories you're telling, recognize what stories you are telling that you might not recognize, and then try to, stand up and tell a story more intentionally, potentially making these stories more compelling and inclusive, recognizing that they're multifaceted as we're talking about, but keeping them adaptive as well. So knowing that one story is not going to be, that's it. You know, you can't hang on to the industrial story of Missoula, because that's not the case. These stories need to be adaptive and continue to evolve. Excuse me. I also want to just center this for a moment. Throughout this process, it's been just extremely compelling to me to recognize at different points that not to be glib, but the story of the degradation of Grant Creek is the story of the settler colonization of the Missoula Valley. It's the reasons, whichever one you choose, it's the story of the settlement of the Missoula Valley. And you know, again, that's not a small thing to say. What does that mean? What's the significance of that statement? Very complex territory, which I won't get to today. But when you say statements like this, like one interviewee said, the history of this area is all ag, right? You know, conversational thing to say. But when you set the bounds of the story that way, you give yourself a different set of options, different set of understandings of the political landscape, of what you might imagine in the future, and what things you have to address that are part of the past. And this person is also talking about the way that Grant Creek's identity has changed over the years. And this person here has a really nice quote about how it's time to embrace the change and recognize Grant Creek as a new entity. It's stuck halfway in the past and half in the future, not in either place. Let's give it a life, a real life. A really nice way of phrasing this, kind of a multidisciplinary way of envisioning the future of Grant Creek. I'm going to finish here with some tangible current things that are happening that I hope you all can walk away here being aware of and potentially wanting to get involved with. So the Grant Creek Working Group is convened by the Clarkport Coalition, facilitated by the Clarkport Coalition, started as with this mission to bring together stakeholders to ensure that restoration and protection of Grant Creek is a central goal of the development, all of these projects that are happening, really the future of Missoula in that area. The goal is to focus on inclusive public engagement, work through a consensus process across multiple interests. And there are multiple interests, multiple different divergent interests, very complex. Really focus on simple group learning, like this kind of presentation, or all kinds of other presentations we've had in our monthly meetings, all with the goal of working towards that vision and strategy. Those are sort of the business terms for ReSTORYing, right? What is the vision and strategy for Grant Creek long term? In the end of last year, the group came to these 7 values, which are hard to read here. I'll just read some of them out. The sections are basically restore and conserve ecosystem services, promote community needs, and support economic development interest. Kind of multiple sets of values that were the group was hoping that they'd guide the city's process with the proposed rerouting of Grant Creek, where that horseshoe bend is, to more directly connect and potentially improve flow and habitat and a variety of other things. So these values are the goal is to support and inform that process. And then community engagement. This is all part of what I'm just excited to be part of here. And Bert, I knew would be happy about these 2 highlights with the Grant Creek Trails Association. Has worked very hard, and it's a really complex relational process to work with the CSKT, Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, to get these amazing signs set up and this beautiful bench, which I think is a reflection of this. I put it here, the arts and the music. How are we going to tell this story? That's the question. And so all these people are doing these different projects that feed into the larger story of what Grant Creek is. I'm not going to list all these things, but there's a variety of organizations, WEN, CFC, Friends of Grant Creek Trails Association, CSKT, that are involved in telling this story. And they're just people, they're public facing organizations that I think all of you should feel empowered to also chime in and share your piece on what Grant Creek story is and how we will tell it. So I'll wrap it up there, and thank you for bearing with me. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Has there been an attempt to sequester some of that, farming land so that they're never developed?
There's a lot of interest in that, I'd say. The Mullins Certificate Master Plan is very development heavy, but it does have areas that are set aside for local farms, community farms, and other kind of mixed use. That was the idea, is that instead of subdivision, let's put a place where you can have dense living, amenities, farms, all in one place. Kind of keep the spirit of Missoula in that area. The conservation district is working really hard to articulate the need to preserve farmland in the area, and a variety of other people too. The planning board talks about that a lot. I think there's a lot of people that see the historical value of that area, but I think right now the development of the certificate master plan is proceeding. There's still more ag land around there that I think people will say, you got to do that, let's preserve these areas and ranch them.
Where's the Forest Service property line up there?
It's up by Bench Road. Grant Creek Road goes past Snowball Road, past the left turn, goes up and it forks and goes across the creek to Bench Road, and the Grant Creek Road also ends at the top. And there's the East Fork of Grant Creek comes down, and that's about where the Forest Service boundary is.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, yeah, you're on fire.
I haven't been in class for 40 years. You guys have fun. What's the etymology of that creek? Is there a good insect?
We didn't study that directly, and I hope Wen is actually going to be involved in some of those kinds of monitoring efforts, which is exciting, and Clark Fork Coalition too, I believe. There have been studies about the dippers, which are indicator species of the macroinvertebrates on the creek, and there's a lot of dippers up by Prospect, as Bert will tell you. And there's we saw them kind of in the healthier areas. We saw them present.
Any evidence of mining attempts in the upper region?
I had heard that there were a couple mining leases, but I have not seen any signs of that. There's it's limited. Yeah.
That was my question too. Like, can you talk, Seamus, a little bit more about like access at the Forest Service boundary?
Yeah.
And what that looks like? I know people get really like enticed.
Yeah.
By going up there and checking it out. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Can you tell me?
So there's a Forest Service trail that existed for a long time at the end of Grant Creek Road, but the access point is through somebody's property, and that person was amenable for a long time, and they asked the Forest Service to close it down. And I think the Forest Service has the ability to open that up, but currently the trail is in disrepair, sort of still there, but you really can't get to it without trespassing. So the other thing that other way to get to it is by going over from Snowball over down to Grant Creek, which involves like a 2,000-foot bushwhack down a steep hill. So access is very limited.
But you have to come back up.
And you have to come back up. Well, and
Through the house.
I'm not weighing in on that. But people do backcountry ski back there in the winter, and so I mean that's a really interesting way to get to know it. I mean, we talked about how it's kind of good and bad that people don't access that area. It hasn't been abused too badly, but it would. Yeah, I think all the time about the best way to get up there. Like there's the lakes that you can get over from Point 6. But yeah, it seems, I know that Fish, Wildlife and Parks had to be very patient with the landowner to get access for their surveys, you know, as a government agency. And so I don't think anytime soon that person will be allowing free and open access there.
Speaking of landowners, what impact has Danny Washington had on his little section? Or it's not a little section, I assume.
Yeah, it's a ranch, and it's actually the Rankins Ranch originally. So it's a big section, and the ranch manager is fantastic. Huge buffer for the creek. The ranching, you know, the hay that you see, the hay fields that you'll see on the way up Grant Creek Road, that's part of that ranch. So it's a working ranch, but it's also partly just for fun, for vacation, and for
Did he do any restoring? He's known for.
The- there's been good stewardship, I'd say, like small scale interventions for the good of the creek. But they have amazing habitat up there. So it's a really great chunk that's in one property owner that's in good hands, I'd say.
I'd like to go into a little more detail.
Okay.
So, the hay that you see is basically Grant Creek. Because water is taken out, just it's no roll road. And it goes through the irrigation system on the ranch. And that grows the hay in those hay fields. So, however, having that open space for a variety of reasons is extremely valuable. It comes with a cost, you know, a lot of water, very cold water, clear water, clean water gets diverted to grow that hay, and it comes back in dirty and hot, although still not bad. Now, the other thing I would say is that, let's say there's 2,000 acres on the ranch, I'm gonna just guess. And about 1,500 of that is in conservation easement and will never be developed, all the way over the Butler Creek Road, right down to the Stinking Road. But the low ground where you see the hay is not protected, so there could be solid houses along both sides of Grand Creek.
How about water rights? If it's the Great Rankin Ranch, do they have first water rights to?
The water rights are down here. And they're basically where this new development is occurring. I believe it's state share.
Yeah, it's the earliest water rights would happen kind of at the mouth of the valley. Because that's the nicer place to live. And it's one of the oldest in the state. And so it's kind of amazing. But yeah, there are a lot of water rights, a lot of really senior water rights on Grant Creek.
It's 1889, but it's
Right.
very junior in that drainage relative to what's there to take.
Yeah, and I mean the water rights issue is huge, and the amount of water that gets taken out of Grant Creek has, you know, I mentioned it's intermittent, and it's considered to be an intermittent stream, which is not uncommon in this, you know, south facing drainage in this part of the valley, Montana, but also where and when it goes dry is significantly driven by the withdrawals. So that's a huge question.
Seamus, can you flip back to the slide at the beginning? It's interesting in this conversation. It's number 17 on your slideshow,
Okay.
but it shows the path that shows like the historical where a map will put Grant Creek versus where it flows. I don't know if everybody caught that, but it's really interesting.
A lot of slides here.
It was 17.
Yeah.
One more.
Is that
Yeah, so you can kind
Yeah.
of see it.
and so this is really interesting because this is on one of the first planning maps for the Switipcane master plan area, and they didn't even get Grant Creek right. You know, that's not where it flows. There's a ditch that comes off of it right there. And I don't even think that's where the ditch flows, but that's what's considered. It's so interesting, all these different maps. That may have been the original channel, and Little White Creek you can cross is likely referring to the way these kind of hydrologic features, streams will fan out after a steeper, narrower section like Grant Creek. And this area is kind of where maybe it would have been an alluvial fan characteristic here. So even the idea of the stream being in one channel is potentially historical artifact of the settlement and the ditching. But where this channel is under a bunch of subdivisions and Hellgate Elementary School. And so you may not, like if you're talking about restoring, if you're going to take the strict definition, you're not going to, feasibility wise, you're not going to rip up all those houses. So what do you talk about then? What's the story? How do you work with that? And then continue to envision a better stream. And what they've done is cut across that horseshoe bend and envision that is going to serve as a better form for the stream as it is. Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could go more in depth with the surface water and groundwater interaction between when it goes from perennial to intermittent. And so kind of what I'm hearing you say is they're doing that restoration with the horseshoe. Can you speak to the history, I guess, has it always been split up like this, or has it been perennial all at once, or?
There's times of the year that it flows all the way through.
Okay.
But except for that fish passage barrier,
Right.
that would have been connected all the way. But I think at the same time, it's totally I think it's worth more research. I really do think that it's worth more research, what character historically Grant Creek might have been, because it's kind of a mystery right now. Nobody's really for sure. There's a lot of suggestions and good informed thoughts about that. I can't speak to the groundwater infiltration too much. I don't, that's not my expertise, but also, those ditches are clay lined. They're trying to keep a lot of that water, but they also have gaps. I'm sure they're losing water. And then at the same time, the Flynn Lowney ditch was shut off 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And so all that Clark Fork water will no longer feed Grant Creek at that part. And so it's kind of an open question right now that people are studying. How significant is that addition of Clark Fork water to the perennial segments downstream? So that's absolutely an open question, and people are looking into it. But yeah, all of those hydrologic features are so complex, and yeah, don't have my head wrapped around the full groundwater issue.
So are there wells around that area?
Yeah, and so they drilled wells for the Flynn Lowney ditch
Okay.
right holders as compensation, because they don't use their full right anyway. So
How deep are those wells?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
There is a groundwater study that was done when they put in like some of those houses that you can see like right on like the third line, to model whether or not they could have basements in those areas. And so there is groundwater mapping done in that, and I think it's
here, unfortunately.
yeah, I can't even remember what year it is, but I think it is on the water quality district or the county, it's some county page. Okay. And it has like depth, groundwater depths, defined and stuff. No, they fluctuate a lot on an annual basis. The groundwater is shallow and it fluctuates like quite a bit. Right?
So the water quality district was concerned that modeling was done based on data in a very low flow year with very low groundwater table, and they said, probably it's gonna be higher than that, so take that into consideration when thinking about where you're gonna allow basements and things of that sort. I was also just gonna mention that big green triangle there is airport land, right? And while the airport is all for renaturalizing the creek as much as we can, they're also very, very concerned about attracting geese and raptors and big things like that into the flight path.
Yeah.
And so that's another big concern there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Vicky, I was going to leave that, but no, Vicky's been very involved in that conversation. It's been really great to work out what is the negotiation? How do we have this conversation in a better way? Because they could say, hey, we got the FAA on our back. We say nothing, pave it, right?
They're an independent governmental thing. They The city doesn't tell them what to do, the county doesn't tell them what to do.
But
They have to, hey, tell them.
and then, you know, to have a better, more informed conversation about what, you know, what habitat creates what conditions for what species, you know, right now they're saying nothing should happen here, like do hands off. Right now, there's a bunch of ground squirrels and red-tailed hawks, which is their worst nightmare. You know, that's what they don't want. So hands off doesn't work. But then how do you work in between there and talk about renaturalizing without attracting new bird species? What can you promise with this non-human agency that we have? You know, that's an ongoing conversation, but I'm glad you're on it.
Well, I know the Park Coalition brought in a wildlife biologist who's FAA certified.
Right.
And he made that same point, you know, boy, you've got plenty of attractants here now,
Mhm.
you know, and that some of the other streams around there, Mother Creek and so on, that
Right.
those were more natural and haven't been considered a problem as far as attracting those kind of birds in. So he was supporting the idea of the Grant Creek Working Group, that it's possible to do a lot of renaturalizing of the creek without it adding significantly to risk to the.
Yeah. And it's just great that they're at the table, which is a really positive thing.
They are abandoning a lot of ditches, aren't they, with replacement wells of the land that's no longer agricultural?
That was part of the Flint Lowney ditch. They are shutting that off, and
Yeah.
they may eventually fill those in. I think there's plans to do that, but that's a big part of what they're abandoning.
They did, like people who are getting agricultural water from that ditch, they did put them on the ground. A lot of those people on a well source.
Yeah. We got a lot of ditches in this book.
So part of what's planned is to take this incised creek and, you know, widen it out, and give it some floodplain and grow native vegetation in it. They're probably not cottonwood trees, just
Yeah.
nice little low stuff that'll bring in songbirds, but we're not trying to attract any big birds.
Yeah, we'll see how they do at keeping the cottonwood seeds
It's
from
hard to keep
arriving.
cottonwood.
But yeah, totally. All right. Yeah.
So this spring, summer, are there any concrete, actual things happening on the ground that finally got decided upon? This controversy is going in?
So, I mean, one activity that'll be happening is some field trips with the Grant Creek Working Group. All this, we've been talking things through, and then there's a lot of ground truthing that needs to happen for the people who are involved. One exciting thing is that, you know, just by the people gathering in a room and people meeting each other and having productive conversations, some really exciting projects are in the works, maybe for this fall, for like low tech, you know, fencing of cattle, or potentially plantings in the ranching areas in the bottom. It may even be volunteer days through the conservation district. So that's really exciting. You know, a rancher who's saying, hey, like, you know, I've been on this land for a long time. I really care about Grant Creek, but I need help doing it better. And so this Grant Creek Working Group has kind of been that's been an offshoot project there. I think the city and county plans even involve bidding and potentially breaking ground in the fall for that horseshoe bend process. But that's sort of, there's so many steps there, permits and bidding. So there may be big projects and there may be several small, meaningful projects in the lower area.
I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty, but where does the funding come from for projects on private, so like that is part of the coalition, finding grants for private landowners to do that?
Yeah, well, so a mix. I mean, I think Lily might be able to speak more to the Clark Fork Coalition's role, but the conservation district has small NRCS grants that they get that they they, offer that, and then the landowner will match to a certain amount. For just funding like a small fencing project or planting project like that. So yeah, some of that's federal. This project here was funded, the planning and was funded on a federal build grant. And then I think there's some private, some philanthropic funding that has come through for like the facilitation aspect of this. But then I think Lily, the 5-star project is a different grant as well.
Yeah, I think your answer was good though, with private landowners, like usually a combination of like landowners and somebody helping them access some
Yeah.
water quality, federal, state pot of money. And I think a lot of times landowners do want help and get help, to do that. And then volunteering is always nice, it always lowers the cost.
Yeah.
There is another activity, Seamus, I think a couple, so the 90% for this, like the last chance for public weigh-in on the build grant and the realignment of Grand Creek should be this summer. Like the 90%, and that'll be up on the city's Engage Missoula website, and I'm sure will be shared through all those different groups who are working on it. It sounds like there might be some volunteer monitoring opportunities going on this summer to answer questions about things like bugs or groundwater with when there's another couple little restoration projects. One of them is at Highlander Brewery, so you can go and have a beer there and just check out what passive restoration looks like. It's not fencing cows, it's fencing kids, supposed to be in the sounds like. And they're doing a trash cleanup on the creek too in this upcoming April. So, it's got a lot of focus.
Yeah.
And hopefully the Carport Coalition is gonna finish a watershed restoration plan for Grand Creek and maybe access what kind of funding was that.
Well, I think there's a little bit of sun left, so I kind of want to maybe pause there unless anyone has any other questions. I'm happy to stick around after, but let you guys go and enjoy the rest of the day. And thanks so much for joining.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you guys, everybody, for coming. If you guys want to come to our next speaker series, you can find that on our website at montanawatershed.org. I think Seamus is so humble with how much work he's put into this project. Like, we've been meeting with him over the past few weeks, and it is amazing how much work he's done in this project. Just kind of bridging these social boundaries and ecological boundaries. It's so amazing work that really needs to be done and is super inspiring. So yeah, if you have any questions for us, feel free to visit our website. You can sign up for our monitoring and keep your eyes open for what that monitoring will look like moving forward when we do go to Grand Creek. Cool. Thanks, y'all.